Hello there everyone. So today what we're going to be building is a selection with React Native gesture handler. The hub we're building will basically allow us to hold on and click on one of the cells and then drag the selection of the cell to any other cell, and then as you release you get selected cells from index 1 through 8. We are also able to select from the end and go all the way to the top. And another thing that's really important is that we can also select really accurately in between those edges, which also gives us a really smooth animation. Excellent. So how do we go about building this app? Well, we're going to be leveraging the gesture handler. We're basically keeping track of the X and Y axis as we are hovering to calculate what cell we're currently on. To do that, the gesture handler gives us event data. This event data comes in with a bunch of values. The one we're interested in is X and Y values. If we are, for example, clicking here on cell 0, we're going to get the X from the left edge and the Y from the top edge of the view, not from the top of the actual root component. So one way to do this is to store an array with all the cells start and end X and Y. And so, for example, we could technically say start X and start Y is 10 pixels from the margin left of 10 pixels. Then we add the height and width, and we can then get the end X and end Y values. This approach is not the best because we're going to have to loop through a big array and make large computations every time the X and Y values change. And that will be really expensive on the JavaScript thread. And so a better approach is to say, well, we can assume that cell 0 will be the same height and width as all the other cells. And this way we can simply say, let's only store the value of one of the cells. So let's say cell 0. What we can then do is, as we hover and X and Y values change, we can divide them by the height and width of the cells we stored as a reference. And that will give us actually the column and row we're currently on. So let's say I click here, which is about 300 pixels on the x-axis. And we know well that one cell has a width of 200 pixels. We know that we are on the second cell, because if we divide x by the width, we will get a number larger than 1. So we know we are on the index 1, and we can do the same for the row. Great. Now that the approach is clear, we can jump into our code and take a look at what we've actually got here. So for now, I just made a simple view which returns a container, and I already went on to write some of the styles for the cell and the container. So this one's going to be our current project. Let's go on and start from actually rendering those empty cells. So for this, we can use a flat list from React Native. And what we have in this flat list is going to be a style of table and the data. So for the data now, we're only gonna render tables and columns. We don't really care about the value of the data. So we're just going to pass in an arbitrary number. So we're going to do table columns, then table rows, because we just care about the length of the array. We don't really care about the content. We're just going to say fill the array with ones. We're adding a key extractor, which is going to be set string. Then we can say scroll enabled false. Number of columns is going to be table columns. And then finally render item, getting the index. And it's going to say, we're going to make a reference of the is selected, which for now will just be false. We'll get back to this. And it's going to return our actual cell. And our cell is gonna have a style of styles cell, and just because we want to change the style when the cell is selected, we can say background color. If it is selected, we give it a value of FFF, which is just white. Otherwise, we're gonna give it a value of FFF with opacity. And something else, just a shadow radius, that's gonna be is selected. It's gonna be 2, otherwise it's gonna be 5. Great. So let's take a look at what we've got so far, and boom, we got the 4 cells rendered on our screen, looking beautiful. So what we need to do now is basically install the React Native gesture handler library and start experimenting with those X and Y values. So to install React Native gesture handler, we can go over to our browser and for the doc over to installation. And because we use a project managed by Expo, the installation will be fairly simple. All we need to do is copy this command, go over to our terminal, plug it in. Now onto our code, we have to go on app.tsx and basically wrap our index with a gesture handler, a root view, which will have a flex of 1. And that's pretty much it. If you're using a bare project or you're trying to install the gesture handler elsewhere, refer to the documentation and the installation is going to be fairly straightforward. So now that we have the library, let's go back to our table component and let's create a gesture. So we can say gesture is going to be a gesture of pen. This will give us a lot of functions that we can call on it. For now, we're just going to say onChange and console log the value of the event. Another thing what we need to do is pass this gesture into the view. So we have a gesture detector, which will take an argument gesture, and we need to wrap the flat list just like that. Excellent. So let's go over to our terminal, refresh the app, and there you go. As we hover around and we hold, we get different values, and you can see here the X value. If I stay around this first cell, is going to be about 60 pixels, as opposed to the absolute Y, which is going to be the value from the top, which is 345 pixels. Okay, so let's now improve our function. Let's go back to our code. So something that the library recommends is to wrap the gesture in a use memo. So let's do that, because this will be quite an expensive calculation. We are gonna have a non-begin function here, which for now doesn't do anything. We're gonna have an onChange, and we are gonna have onFinalize. This one is once the gesture ends. Then we will also add properties such as should cancel when outside, true, and on touch is cancelled will basically be what do we want to do when the touch is cancelled. In our case, we just say reset selection. On begin, on change, and on finalize will be responsible for keeping track of the index we're currently hovering over. Now, before we handle the X and Y axis, as we mentioned, we need to calculate how big the cell actually is. So how do we do that? We don't have a fixed value. The way we can do that is actually via a non-layout property. OnLayout will basically be a function we're just going to create now. So let's say const onLayout. And whenever you call in onLayout, is also recommended to use a callback just to memorize the value. OnLayout returns a layout change event. we can then call in event target measure, which is a function with x, y, width, and height. We don't care about x and y in this case, so we're just gonna skip those two, get width and height, and I think we might have to type them as well. So these are gonna be numbers. For now we can console log width and height, but what we actually need to do, and it's complaining because I need to close the callback just like that. And we need to store these two values, so let's just make a ref cell size. So it's going to be a use ref. The value here is basically going to be width of number and height number. And we can export this into an interface called cell size. Cell size. Excellent. So we now can assign the value to cell size. This becomes width and height. And now we pass in the value of onLayout to the view, which will calculate the size. But we don't want to calculate the size of all the cells. That will be pointless, so we can just pass this value into our first cell. So we can say index equals 1. We pass in onLayout. Otherwise, we keep this function undefined. Okay, so now we know how big the cell actually is. We know the x and y values. Now we can finally start working on our drug selection. So we can write a function that will give us the index that we are currently on. So let's do that. Let's go back to our code. We can create a function that's going to be handle drug selection. And handle drug selection will basically take in coordinates that are going to be x and y. And x is going to be a number and y is going to be a number also. Okay. Now, here we can say if cell size dot current, we can add a God clause. If we don't have a cell size dot current, we just return the function. We don't want to execute this. But if there is a cell size dot current, first we need to adjust the width and height to also take into account the margins that can be in either side. So we do that by doing cell width is going to be cell size dot current dot width plus cell margin times 2. Same is going to be for the height. There you go. Now that we got the adjusted cell size, we can calculate what row and column the selection is currently on based on these coordinates. So target column is going to be y divided by cell width. And this is basically the main idea, but it's quite not enough because this will give us a value that's really specific. So what we basically want to do is say how many columns have actually been filled, and we don't want any decimals. We just want to know the value that have fully been filled. So here we can give a math.floor. And that's not all. If we look at the margin we pass into the view, we're passing in the margin on both sides, but we also need to account for the margin on the outskirt of the view. And this is why we say it's going to be y minus cell margin again to exclude those ones on the side. Same thing is going to be for the height. So height is going to give us the target row, and it's going to be on the divided by the cell height. Apologies, this one is supposed to be x divided by cell width and y divided by cell height. Will basically give us the target of x and y. So let's say we want to select the last one, which basically has a target row of 1 and a target column of 1. So we're here. 1, 1. The way we calculate that is basically just saying return target row times the columns, because and so we get the value of 2. And to that we basically add the target column, which is going to the actual target column, which is going to be 1. And so it's going to be 2 plus 1, and the index will actually be 3, so the index we're looking at. Great. So this is also an expensive function that we'll call really often, so I would recommend wrapping this into a callback. So let's now create indexes for the start and end. It's going to be a state, because we want to re-render. This one's going to be a number, and we can duplicate that to make the end index. And by the way, this interface can be extrapolated into coordinates. Interface coordinates. Great. We can now go on begin and extrapolate from the event just the x and y coordinates. And we can get the index by doing handle drag selection and passing in those coordinates, right? Now, for the onBegin, when we actually press, we want to set both the start and end index because we want to see an actual selection. And when we change, we want to keep start index to the same index, but we want to change the end index to wherever we are hovering over. So let's do that. Set start index is going to be index. Set end index is also going to be index. On change is also going to be handled now, so we can just call in this value, and we can only set the end index in this instance with the result of the drag selection. That looks pretty neat. Let's console log those start and end indexes. And let's go over to our terminal. So we can refresh the app. And look at that. End index is 1, start index is 0. And as we move across from cell to cell, we see the selections change. Because we know that works, now we can even increase the value of the cells to refresh the app. We can go all the way up to 5, and every time we go down, we get added another 5 to the selection. So all the way to 47. And that's quite smooth as well. We still don't see the actual selection. So now what we need to have is a function that calculates if the index of the actual cell is within the range of the start and end index, and then highlight it. So let's go back to our code. Here we can make a function called isWithinRange. And isWithinRange is basically going to receive the index of the actual cell, which is a number, and is going to check for, well, we need to make sure that start and end index both exist. So we can say if no start index or no end index, and we return false. This will return a Boolean, by the way. But this one is not enough, because if the start or end index is 0, it will still be a falsy value, so it will not trigger. So here we can call isNumber from Lodash, and that will also include zeros. So if we got both start and end indexes, we can then return a value is index bigger or equal than start index, and is index also smaller or equal than end index. Okay, so let's now take the function and go back to our condition to check if it's selected. And now we can pass in the index to this. Let's go over to our terminal and refresh the app. And now, if we click, we can see the selection, and as we move over, we can see the cells being highlighted. However, now, obviously, we don't reset the selection yet, and also, we don't account for selections that start from a higher index and want to go down. So the way we fix that is to simply go back to our code and invert the condition as well. So let's say it's gonna either be that, you can just copy that and invert end index with start index, and great. Go back to our terminal, refresh. We got the selection going up, and we also got the selection going down. Great, so back to our code. What is left to be done here? Well, we need a function to reset our state. So after we are done with a selection, we can reset basically our indexes. So this one's going to be undefined, and set end index is going to be undefined. And we want to pass in this reset state once the selection has been finalized, and also when the touch is cancelled, right? So we want to pass into both of these. Before we do that though, we do have, or at least we are supposed to have, start and end indexes. So let's make a check for that, similar to the one we made here for is within range. So if we do have them, we want to perhaps get an alert for now that tells us a selection from index start index to index end index. Great. Let's go back to our terminal. Let's refresh the app. As I hover above, okay, it's not working because, let's go back to our code. Use memo as missing dependencies, because handle drug selection, it should be part of the drug selection. Not only that, but also start index and end index should make part of the dependency array. So once we wrap those, just double checking, I think now it should be fine. Yeah, so let's save that. Go back to our terminal. And boom, oh, excellent. So we got the selection working, we got the resetting of the state, and that's the feature for you. And as you can see, you can even increase the value of tables and columns to a ridiculous number, like 100 cells. And it should still work fine. Yeah, it's not lagging at all on 100 cell. And you get from cell 2 to 85. Awesome. So that's the feature for you. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want more content like this, feel free to leave a comment down below. Thank you.